Outsiders. Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the show that is to Albanese's woeful Labor Party, the hypocritical waste of space Teals and the noxious Greens, what the late great Tom Petty was to writing an unforgettable tune that is just perfect for satirising.
He's an old guy, has dementia, can't lead us, and the country is screwed. Tells some big lies, barely speaks English, sniffs children, and their mom's hair too.
Yes, that spoof of Tom Petty's free-fallen hit from the 90s is satirically credited Joe Biden and the Alzheimer's on Common Man Records and was put out on Truth Social by none other than Donald Trump.
Goes the wrong way when he reads his speeches, gets lost each day in the White House yard. All the Dems say that we should re-elect him. How can he run when walking is hard?
All we need now is a great hook and a memorable chorus to sum it all up.
And Joe keeps falling, yeah, he keeps falling, keeps falling, falling, yeah, he keeps falling, and Joe keeps falling, yeah, he keeps falling, keeps falling, falling, yeah, he keeps falling.
And while Joe Biden keeps on stumbling all over himself, let's grab the latest Outsiders news. Well, what a big surprise, James and Rita, that the left eating themselves on the weekend. As usual, Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen says she is disgusted by the pro-Palestine activists who gatecrashed the Victorian Labor State Conference, where 6 ridiculous motions on Gaza were carried on Saturday. Have a look. What a surprise, Rita. The Victorian Labor Party struggling with pro-Palestinian activists. Who'd have thought? Ooh.
Well, they've pandered strongly to them, but they want more and more. And it's very interesting to see the Victorian Premier come out so strongly, say she's disgusted by the homophobia, anti-Semitism, the violence of what she has seen at the state conference in Moonee Valley Racecourse. But you look at the resolutions that were put forward and how strongly they were passed by the membership there. That tells you everything you need to know. This isn't just some fringe group. These votes are getting up. And let me tell you one of these ones. It's utilise international forums to demand an end to the perpetual military occupation and human rights violations, which are in flagrant violation of international law, and advocate for the implementation of UN resolutions will provide a solution for peace and security. So they want Australia to come out and demand that Israel cease these operations, to basically declare Israel guilty of gross human rights violations. Well, I mean, it is just incredible to see this happening. And as I think Josh Burns said, and other Jewish advocates have said, you're essentially here rewarding Hamas for their behaviour.
Absolutely.
Because
that's what the Labor Party have done, James.
Well, I mean, Rita, you said that these resolutions are about asking Israel to cease various activities, but ultimately what they're about is asking Israel to cease to exist. I mean, because that's the ultimate goal of all of this. All of this stuff is very pro-Hamas. At the end of the day, it all winds up playing into Hamas's hands. I mean, calling for Israel to release its, quote, political prisoners. Remember that Sinwar, the guy who's the head of Hamas, was exchanged in one of those prisoner swaps years ago, I think for Gilad Shalit. And the amazing thing, though, about this, though, is that, you look at this, you look at what's going on, and this is what happens. in some ways, I kind of like to see the consequences of the actions, because Labor in Victoria particularly has flirted for years, not just with the anti-Israel stuff, not just with, the fringe anti-Semitic stuff, but also with Marxism, with anti-Westernism, because that's ultimately, I think if we just are reductive about this and talk about this as a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, the way it's playing out in the West, it's a much bigger fight. It is a fight within the West, because, the people who are out demonstrating against Israel and against America and for Iran and for Hamas, they're Westerners, right? So this is a war that's going on within the West, and those forces have all been stoked by left-wing parties, Labor here, the Democrats, the hard left in the United States. To get to where we are today, it's like, well, they've created this monster. They have created the monster of these demonstrations, and now they're reaping what they've sown with this at this Labor conference. But unfortunately, now they have no ability to put this, horrendous genie back in the bottle.
Well, and if they thought that vote at the UN that broke 70 plus years of bipartisanship was going to silence these factions, well, they were very wrong indeed. All it has done is embolden them, have them demanding more and more. And they're vulnerable, and they know they're vulnerable because they've got several electorates with large Muslim populations, which could determine the outcomes of those elections. So they know that this is a bind they're in. But you have to ask, if those voters are going to vote on this issue and this issue alone, they're not going to give the vote to the coalition. Do they really think they're going to lose these seats to the Greens? Because the Greens are their biggest threat there. I know they may have some independents who run on a single issue, as we saw happen in the UK recently with the council elections. But I do wonder also whether they're jumping at shadows, James, whether they really are in danger of having these voters abandon them on this issue. Where are they going to go?
Well, there is a lot of concern, I know, in Western Sydney, certainly after what happened with Di Lee in Fowler, which, of course, was supposed to be Christina Keneally's seat at the last election, and she came out as a strong community independent there. There is a big concern that these independent candidates rise up, and if they do, they split the vote. They can split that vote.
But
with
you're
Labor.
right, James.
But we've got a preferential system, so if
but those preferences don't necessarily flow, and if they're furious at Labor for what they perceive as being too pro-Israel, they've got a big problem. And this is why, you had that whole situation last week or the other week where Jason Clare got smacked down by Anthony Albanese over this, because he went far too out there for his seat of, I think, Blaxland out in Western Sydney.
You say he went too far. They had a Labor senator, Fatima Payman, come out and say, from the river to the sea, the phrase that Anthony Albanese said encourages violence.
Well, this is a real test of Anthony.
Why hasn't Anthony Albanese come out and got rid of Fatima Payman? It's absolutely disgraceful. West Australian senator, she's 29 years old. This is where multiculturalism has taken us. Labor has built this kind of coalition of all the fringe groups that they can find, and it's coming back to bite them hard, as it is doing in England, where you now have, for example, in a place that's supposedly as trendy and progressive as Brighton and Hove, they now have a mayor who is a hardcore Muslim activist. And the reality is you cannot ultimately combine hardcore Muslim values with hardcore LGBTIQ, progressive, etc. values. It doesn't work, but Labor has built this coalition. Now it's coming hard to bite them. You've got, at those demonstrations at the Labor Party in Victoria, they're accusing the activists, the pro-Palestinian activists, the Labor Party are accusing them of being homophobic, etc., etc., etc. All the things they themselves, Labor, have failed to pull into control in the last decade or so. David Shoebridge, the Greens MP here in New South Wales, he as well, Rita, tweeted, "From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free." That's a member of the New South Wales Parliament and one who holds enormous sway in the New South Wales Parliament. What are they going to do about that, James?
Well, yeah, exactly. But I want to go back to this Fatima Payman thing, because this is a real test for Anthony Albanese. And,
Sure is.
Albanese, his personal views on this, I think, are pretty sensible. I think that he is not, part of the whole from the river to the sea group But
Is he? Because as an adult, as
it
a
was
politician...
his idea. It was his
He
idea,
listens to-
James, to sign to vote yes for the Palestinian recognition. That is the same
I
thing.
And he
understand
was
this.
a
Hang on,
pro-Palestinian
guys.
Well-
Well, no, I mean, if you look at his history on this stuff, this has
Yes.
never been.
History all
Standing
over
at
the place.
pro-Palestinian rallies way back in when he was a student.
Yeah, okay, fine. But this issue
That's
with
his history.
this issue with payment, this is the test. Is he going to kick her out? If
No,
he
of course
doesn't,
he's not.
then it's because
let
he
me
knows
think about
that
this,
the
James.
crossbench.
A woman in a hijab.
Yeah, exactly. But not only that, Senate votes. Senate votes. The whole thing comes down to the fact that the Senate is such a precarious place right now for the government. So they can't, even if he wanted to, he can't ditch her. He can't get rid of anybody because they cannot afford to not be able to get legislation to the Senate, which is such a crazy melange of people already. So this is a huge issue for them. But on the multiculturalism point, Rowan, I think you made a really important point, but there's more to it than just the conflict within the left between, these different factions. It's the fact that they have celebrated, not just for years, for decades now, this idea where you maintain a loyalty to someplace other than Australia. That's wherever you're from.
Yep.
So the idea then is that you suddenly have people coming in and voting on issues that have nothing to do with Australia. And this is going to be the great challenge for Australia going forward and there's a big migration review that's coming up. The government is working on it right now. There's going to be a big review coming up on how do we go about making people Australians. And I think the government's going to fluff this completely because they don't know what to do about it.
Let's have a look at young Fatima here. Let's have a listen to her. This is where multiculturalism has landed Australia in 2024.
This is a genocide. And we need to stop pretending otherwise. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
So here's a young lady whose parents came from Afghanistan, were welcomed into Australia, into Western Australia, a wonderful part of the world, most embracing, warm embrace, and has had all the advantages of Australian citizenship, a great education, great lifestyle there in WA. I'm sure the parents are happier there. I'm assuming that they're happier there in WA than they were in Afghanistan. And yet this young lady has reached the point where she's quite happy to call for the genocide of Jews and the abolition of the State of Israel on the other side of the world, courtesy of her position in the Australian Parliament. If Australia thinks that's a successful multicultural outcome, I'm afraid I disagree.
I'm sure she would have been aware of the media reports making it clear that her Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was unequivocal in condemning that statement from the river to the sea, saying that agreeing that it's one that motivates violence. So for her to say those words after all that
deliberately provocative,
is a bold move indeed,
and
and she is challenging Anthony Albanese, and this is a massive test of his leadership. Do you mean what you say? Do your words
Are
mean
you a
something?
leader? Are you a leader?
Let's
But let
see.
me also just finish the point here that's come out this week. In Afghanistan, the Taliban, the cruelty of the Taliban to young women, to girls, is beyond belief. Yet here's a woman whose parents are from Afghanistan. I haven't heard her criticising the Taliban. I haven't heard her defending the women of Afghanistan who are in a dreadful, dreadful state at the moment. Why doesn't she think about that, James?
Well, exactly. I mean, and you said before, Rowan, you said, well, she's a product of, Australian education. Well, yeah. And actually, I think that's the way a lot of educators would like to see people come up and come out of it saying things like that. Yeah, no, I mean, she would never sit in the parliament in Afghanistan to the extent they even have a parliament because she's a woman, and yet here she is and she's attacking Western values and Israel and all of this.
Well, there are millions of women who are subjugated in Muslim majority countries, and it's not just Fatima. The feminist movement in general is very much silent on their plight.
But Rita,
and
think
you
about
see
this.
these women who, with green hair and fringes cut like this, donning kaffirs and hijabs and marching and doing solidarity, wearing hijabs in solidarity. And you wonder, there are women in Iran, Afghanistan, all across many countries where they are risking their lives fighting to be
Absolutely.
free.
Well,
Rita,
to be
these
free
are the
of
same people.
hijab,
These
to
are
be
the
free
same.
of-
This is the same political tribe here of people who will happily go out. Today they're in keffiyehs and they're demonstrating for Palestine. Yesterday they would have been putting on Handmaid's Tale outfits and demonstrating against the Morrison government. I mean, this is how utterly inconsistent the left is when it comes to women. But the thing is, the left constantly sacrifices women to the goals of its broader kind of revolutionary cause. Sometimes, they're in favor of women when it can be used, only when it can be used as a political attack against conservatives, against right. But the moment, that's over, then it's all back to situation normal.
We saw that when Trump was elected.
Completely.
We had these massive marches
That's
across the Western world, right here in Sydney and Melbourne, the Pussy Hat marches,
all that.
remember?
You said it, not me.
Yeah. I don't know which one I prefer, the Pussy Hats or the
Handmaid's Tale?
the burqas they seem to be favouring these days. But then when it comes to LGBTQ rights, conflicting with women's rights, they take the side of the LGBTQ activists.
Particularly the T.
And when it comes to Islamists and women being systematically oppressed under Islam, they take the side of the Islamists. So it is completely incoherent, but it's in keeping with having this anti-West position.
It's not
across the
incoherent.
board.
It's
That's the thing.
anti-West. It's anti-West, and it's all about power. So whichever group is going to be the next one to get them to power, that's where they go with.
Well, one of the great tragedies as well of multiculturalism was the attempt, if you like, during the Voice campaign last year by large elements and organisations within the Jewish community to advocate for the Voice, saying yes for the Voice. One organisation didn't, that was the Australian Jewish Association, but most did. And yet come October 7th, where was the gratitude? No. The Indigenous activist movement, not Indigenous Australia, I'm referring only to the Indigenous activists, all immediately sided again with Hamas and the Palestinians.
I haven't heard many
and in fact,
apologies.
Hamas and the Palestinians are one and the same. Let's stop beating around the bush and trying to delineate between Hamas and the Palestinians. Hamas are the elected government of the Gazan branch of the Palestinian community and have their largely full support. And we now learnt as well in the last few days that Fatah and the Palestinian Authority did have activists involved in the Hamas atrocities of October 7th. So let's stop this kind of, this whole separate thing. There are clear links between Hamas and the broader Palestinian communities.
I think it's unfair to say all Palestinians back Hamas.
Not all, but 70%.
If there was an election, they would probably still be
Absolutely.
re-elected despite
In the West Bank as well.
And strongly
in
up.
the West Bank as well.
And that's why they haven't had elections in the West Bank for a long time. So, but I mean, there are obviously people there who keep their opinions very quiet, because if you speak out against Hamas in Gaza, you're
finished,
you're
exactly.
Killed
and
in the
those
most
people
brutal
need to be
fashion.
supported. Those people need to be supported.
Well, but this is the thing. I mean, we've seen horrific video this week coming around out on X, formerly Twitter, of Hamas shooting Palestinians, attacking Palestinians trying to get some of the aid that the West is trying to send in. So, let's not have any qualms about the fact that Hamas is a really, it's a mafia thug-like organization that rules the place with an iron. Yes, it's a very much a Nazi-type organization. But that said, what you said is correct. Poll after poll, survey after survey has shown, large support for Hamas. And we only had to see the vision of, on October 7th, when they brought hostages back in the back of pickup trucks, in the back of utes, the cheering, the celebration, the beating with sticks, the reports we've had from hostages who have made it out of Gaza, that they were tormented by civilian Gazans. There were reports that teachers, all sorts of people were involved in keeping them captive. So, yes, no, your point, Rowan, is absolutely correct, that the Palestinian Gazans largely support exactly what happened, the horrors and atrocities of October 7th.
If you are going to be a pro-Palestinian activist, you've got to be prepared to understand the distinctions. You've got to be prepared to either condemn Hamas, which we're not hearing enough of, and therefore, as we said, Fatima Payman and others, David Shoebridge, for coming out with genocidal pro-Palestinian statements if they're not prepared to
all they need to do, all the demonstrators need to be saying is saying a simple thing. They should be saying, Hamas, release the hostages and surrender, and that is what will be the best outcome for the Palestinian people. But they don't care about that.
I don't know what fantasy world you two exist in. But we've had protests every single week, sometimes multiple protests in a week in this country, UK, US, across much of the West. And we have seen footage of lone protesters, particularly in London, and we've shown the footage right here, holding up Hamas terrorist sign and being
shouted down.
Not just shouted down, physically attacked, having their sign ripped from their hands, and often the lone protester holding up a Hamas terrorist sign is the one who's being arrested. So that they are not only not saying it, they are hostile to anybody who would say it. And I think to make that distinction, because I think it's a distinction that should be made, that Palestinian cause and the Hamas cause are not the same thing, then you should be very clear at these protests to say, we are anti-Hamas, have anti-Hamas signs, have free the hostages signs, but we don't see that at the moment.
But because it's always Israel's fault. That's what it comes down to.
Now, the reason I was talking about the Voice was that efforts to close the gap between Indigenous Australians and the rest of the country, in a report in the Australian newspaper yesterday, quote, stalled during the Voice referendum.
Surprise.
There you go. So all that effort by the Albanese government and those who are responsible for closing the gap, that means raising the living standards and prosperity of Indigenous Australians, they are the ones now saying, you know what, Labor? All our efforts, were stalled by the Voice. So well done, Labor. You even stuffed that up. Ideology, idiocy and incompetency at every turn.
Well, Rowan,
what do you do?
I think that, in some ways, yes, it's bad that the Voice campaign stalled progress on closing the gap. We all want to close the gap. But can you just imagine how bad it would be if the Voice had actually passed?
Absolutely.
I mean, you want to talk about something that would stop closing the gap, it would be spending all of this money on this huge bureaucracy that would then go pay itself to go, take reports and do things, interfere with parliamentary legislation and do everything else it was going to do, and not actually do anything to close the gap. I mean, that was a good result. Let's not forget the fact that this was a very, very good result.
It was a great result, but Labor are ignoring it. They're just ploughing ahead in all the different states with their own voices. But the point is, the reality is that this sort of virtue signalling, weird left-wing ideological campaign actually has negative impacts on Indigenous Australians who are there on the ground, and they're the ones calling it out. There you go.
We had so much focus in recent weeks on the treatment of women, violence against women, so many women being victims of domestic violence in particular. And again, we saw the activist class there be largely silent about the overrepresentation of Indigenous women in those statistics. Now, more than 30 times likely Indigenous women are of being hospitalised due to domestic violence than non-Indigenous women. That is such a shameful, incredible statistic. The stats there are just off the charts, and yet there's this hesitancy to talk about it, to put it on the record because they want to, I don't know, because they're scared of being called racist. I don't know if they're scared of pointing the finger at a community who really does need to address this issue. But the likes of Jacinta Nampijinpa Price have talked about this for years, and they've also talked about
for doing so.
They do, but they also talk about how things like The Voice, the Australia Day debate, the flag debate, all this nonsense actually takes the attention away from the areas that need the focus. But when do you ever hear these activists talk about this issue? I would have thought that would be that and the plight of children would be the number 1 and 2 issues you talk
Yeah,
about.
You're not
Rita, the
suggesting
point
the
is-
left are hypocrites who don't care about the real problems that they pretend to. I think you might be onto something there,
The
Rita.
problem is so many of the activists who are, working in the domestic violence space, particularly on the political side of things, it's not so much about solving the problem where there are real problems, but it's doing this whole sort of societal remaking of society.
Exactly. Tearing down the West
we've
is the main agenda.
We've got to go and re-educate all men. We've got to talk about toxic masculinity. We've got to do this and that, and it's about that sort of vibe. It's not about actually going where there's real issues, horrible issues, and solving those hard problems on the ground, because it's much more interesting for them to sit in conference rooms and talk about, how terrible male society is. We've got to remake that.
And the conduct of boys at private schools.
Yeah, boys at private schools, worse.
Yeah, risque jokes. I mean, they're very, very keen to draw a direct line between risque jokes and un-PC language and violence against women, but drawing a line between women who are 30 times more likely to end up hospitalised due to domestic violence and the issue, no, that's too much.
Now, also this week, to the shame of the Australian government, they passed the Digital ID Bill. So a digital ID has established an economy-wide digital ID system which allows financial organisations and providers to apply and join the government's digital ID platform. It sounds, they tell you it's all voluntary, the benefits will be for an easier way to do things, etc. All of which may be true. But the problem is, a digital ID is absolutely the gateway to a technocracy and digital tyranny, intentional or otherwise. The sort of tyranny we saw during COVID in Canada, when people had their bank accounts and their access to money completely denied them by the government because the government didn't approve of them. That was just a foretaster. In China, of course, the whole social credit system, a digital ID allows complete control of the population. This is the problem. We'll be talking about it a bit more later. But the coalition voted against it, but really did nothing to stop it happening because, of course, they were the ones who introduced the original ID legislation in the last parliament. Quickly, Rita, our favourite, Mr. Prosciutto.
Oh, what's he
sliced
done now?
very thin. He's apologised, privately settled 2 of the 3 defamation cases as part of the settlement. Mr. Prosciutto issued a lengthy public apology to Kelly J. Keane, Posey Parker, who we've had here on Outsiders, and Melbourne woman Angela Jones, we've also had here on Outsiders. What do you make of it, Rita?
I was surprised the 2 ladies accepted this apology. I thought the apology was weak. He then did an interview where he didn't really seem to defend the apology, or it was a very bizarre performance from him, again, post-apology, when the media asked him, does he actually stand by the apology? But the Moira Deeming case, the main case, that continues, and that is going to be fascinating to behold, because she is one who I think would want more than a weak apology. I think she wants some measure of justice, and I think they have tried to negotiate an apology in the past, or some sort of an acknowledgement of mistakes being made, but he didn't come to the party, from what I understand. I mean, let's not forget, he put out a dossier. His office put out a dossier. I mean, how silly would you have to be to put this stuff in writing? Like, the lawyers must just be rubbing their hands and go, oh, well, here we go. The work's done for us.
So what can we say? Coming up after the break, Rita's Reality Check. Plus, we'll be chatting to Natasha Hausdorff. Are those Israeli settlements legal or not? Let's ask the experts in a tick.
You're watching Outsiders with your host, Rowan Spontaneous Combustion D, James Smouldering Coals, Morrow, and I'm Rita Panahi, here to warn you that the fun police are coming for something else you may love, something that you enjoy in the privacy of your own home. Not content with ridding Australia of wonderfully useful plastic straws and bags, the fun police, or should that be the safety police, are coming for your wood heaters and open fireplaces. Yes, Asthma Australia is behind a push to ban wood fires in new homes. The charity that receives millions in government funding every year posted this demand on social media site X. We're urging governments to ban wood heaters in new homes in residential areas for healthier living and cleaner air. Wood heaters emit harmful pollutants into neighbourhoods that damage health. Efficient electric heating supports healthier homes and communities. How about a big fat no? How about we do not ban something as essential as fire in the name of safety? For one, wood heaters and fireplaces are one of life's great pleasures. Who doesn't love throwing another log in the fire while enjoying a glass of red and a good book on a cold winter's evening? And two, in Victoria, the idiot state government has already banned gas connections in new homes. That ban came into place this year, meaning any new residential buildings, that includes all subdivisions and public and social housing, will be exclusively connected to electricity to supposedly save us from catastrophic climate change. Of course, our bills are also set to skyrocket further. So no gas heating, and now Asthma Australia wants to ban wood heaters too. Let's hear from Angela Cartwright, Policy Manager at Asthma Australia. She was on 3AW this week.
We definitely want to see more access to renewable energy and more secure renewable energy supply. I guess, again, we're looking at 13% of people and the focus being on residential areas. So we need to have secure, renewable, affordable energy for the vast majority of people who are currently using electric heating and, of course, cooling in summer with increasing heat waves and temperatures.
Oh dear, talk about an own goal. Asthma Australia, which has probably never had any backlash or bad publicity, was suddenly being ratioed on social media by irate asthmatics telling them to stay in their lane. Let's look at some examples. Katie said, "No thank you, I'm asthmatic, have been my whole life, and I don't want to see any forms of energy to heat or cool our homes banned." Timmy said, "No thank you, I have asthma, I love wood heaters and fire pits, get out of our lives. If people with asthma don't like smoke, hide inside." Denise said, "I have chronic asthma, I don't need your silly interference, don't take our wood heaters." And Paul summed up the sentiments of many when he wrote, "Imagine making a post that could destroy your entire organisation because you're so disconnected from the very people you're apparently trying to help." Indeed. Now, if you are suffering from asthma, then you have my sympathy, of course, but you're not getting my fireplace.
Well, we've been talking about the divisions in the Middle East, which continue to tear apart the fabric of our society and around the West as well, with anti-Semitism at its highest rate since the Second World War. So let's bring in the Director of UK Lawyers for Israel, Natasha Hausdorff, who's here in Australia, I'm pleased to say, and is at the moment in Melbourne. Natasha, great to see you. Thanks for coming back on Outsiders. Many things we could talk about, but I just wanted to quickly... You are a lawyer, you're an expert on this topic. One of the things that often comes up is, the settlements, Israel's got these settlements, they're illegal, they shouldn't be there. Can you give us your take briefly on the legality or otherwise of the settlements throughout Judea, Samaria and other parts of Israel?
Good morning. Well, it's very good to be with you. Of course, the allegation of illegal settlements is primarily based on two false premises, and they are both to do with the application of international law. The first is with respect to the status of the territory. And what I would urge any lawyers or even interested individuals to do is simply seek the proper and equal application of international law to Israel as to any state, because there is a universal rule of customary international law that determines the borders of newly emerging states at the Declaration of Independence, in Israel's case, on the 14th of May, 1948. Israel has just marked its Independence Day earlier this week. And that rule dictates that a newly emerging state inherits the pre-existing administrative lines of whatever unit preceded it. Simply put, in 1948, when Israel came into existence, as a operation of that universal rule, it would have inherited the pre-existing lines that included the West Bank and East Jerusalem, what so many misguidedly refer to as occupied territory. Now, of course, that territory was occupied between 1948 and 1967 by Jordan, but when Israel recovered that territory, it applied a temporary administrative framework to it in pursuit of a future peace agreement with Jordan, and in anticipation that under the Land for Peace formula, it would be expected to provide some of that territory in exchange for peaceful coexistence with its neighbour. Of course, that temporary administrative framework has remained, but the critical thing is that it doesn't change the underlying status of the territory. What we have seen since then is the creation of a Palestinian autonomy in areas A and B of the West Bank. They enjoy self-governance in the West Bank, the Palestinian Arabs, as they did and continue to, unfortunately, in the Gaza Strip. We've seen the consequences of that with the violent Hamas takeover in 2007. But the fundamental misapplication of international law here concerns the status of the territory and the misrepresentation of that as occupied. There's another false premise here, which is to do with the application of Article 49.6 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. This is a prohibition on forcible transfer of populations in occupied territory. It's important to note that it was drafted in response to the Jewish experience in the Holocaust, where they were forcibly deported to labor camps, concentration camps, and death camps. And this provision is being abused, and it is being used in order to justify this canard of illegal settlements and illegal settlers. It's important to note that these are individuals who have moved to Judea and Samaria and the West Bank of their own volition, as an expression of their own free will. This is not state transfer. So just alone on those two false premises, I think it's important that we seek a proper application of international law, not to say that it's mind-boggling that this idea that Jews should not live in certain places just because they are Jews has gained currency and legitimacy. And I think quite apart from the application of international law and the proper application of that, we need to be pushing back on such a morally repugnant suggestion.
Fantastic. James?
Well, and this morally repugnant suggestion, as you call it, I mean, this is historically quite unique when you talk about populations that have moved from one place to another, have been resettled after a war and so on. It all comes down to an Arab rejectionism, doesn't it? That's quite, unique. That when Israel was formed, unlike any other state that came out of the empires that fell after the wars of the 20th century, this was the only one that has had and continues to have this third, fourth, fifth generation of rejectionism by its neighbors. And this seems to be supported by a large segment of the international community, which seems really bizarre to me, given it's the same international community that, was responsible for helping to create Israel as something for the Jewish people, as not a colonial movement, but really a decolonizing movement out of the wreckage of the Ottoman Empire.
And the significance of the Jews being the indigenous people. I've been learning a lot about indigeneity in the week that I've spent now in Australia, and that's a critical message. Of course, it's UNRWA and the support that is provided by the international community for that organization that has perpetuated exactly what you're describing. The only people for whom refugee status is passed down generation to generation is the Palestinian Arabs. And it is historically been on the premise that once Israel is destroyed, they will be resettled in Israeli towns and territory. But there is an added misapplication of international law here. You've referred to situations of occupation and indeed transfer of settlers in a real sense, not in the false allegations that we're seeing with respect to Israel. But this does exist around the world. And Professor Eugene Kondratovich has conducted a detailed study of all of those instances, Nagorno-Karabakh, Northern Cyprus, Russia with respect to Abkhazia and Georgia, just to name a few. In none of those instances, in situations of real transfer of individuals and real occupation, is this allegation made. So again, we're faced with international law which is being made up. and falsely applied to Israel. And that has consequences for the international legal system more broadly, not just Israel, I would suggest.
Rita.
We've seen an enormous increase in very overt anti-Semitism, violent acts. We've had police warn Jews that they're going to be arrested for looking openly Jewish during a Palestinian march. And I think we've got some footage that has just emerged from London of a Jewish man again being identified as a Jew and chased. Natasha, in that scene, the man is identified as a Jew and he has to essentially run for his life because there's aggressive people coming after him. What is the solution to that? How do you combat that sort of hate and propensity for violence?
Well, the first thing is to recognise it and to acknowledge that this modern form of anti-Semitism, anti-Israel sentiment, or the hate of the Jewish state, is not acceptable. And the mask slips in those sorts of situations when individuals who say, oh, we have no problem with Jews, we just object to Israel. Well, those anti-Zionists are utilising this modern acceptable face of anti-Semitism. And the fact that the mask has slipped in so many of these recent situations underscores the importance of us drawing a line and saying racism of any form is unacceptable. And so long as law enforcement and governments around the world are seeking to make excuses for hate of the state of Israel, which is ultimately Jew hate, then unfortunately, I think we're going to see instances that you've just played repeated over and over again.
Natasha Halsdorf, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. Hope you enjoy Australia, the rest of your trip here, and many people have enjoyed seeing you and meeting you, and thanks so much for coming on Outsiders this morning. Lots more coming up. We'll be chatting as well to Richard Kemp. Colonel Richard Kemp will be with us very shortly, right here in the studio. Don't go away, Outsiders. Well, the world of net zero just gets crazier and crazier. I'll be talking about the new vehicles emissions standards that passed shamefully in the Parliament this week, the Australian Parliament. But, James, more problems than just legislation with EVs, it would appear.
Well, you know, Ro and Rita, my good friend Tim Blair has a great saying. He always says, nothing green ever works. And here's a great example out of the UK. So basically, these car manufacturers are experimenting with eco-friendly brake cables. You know, these are the things that connect your pedal, your brake pedal, when you want to stop your vehicle to the brakes. And they started,
important.
Yeah, so kind of important for, you know, not dying when you're driving. Anyway, they've replaced the normal petroleum-based substance that they make these strong things with to hold the brake fluid with an eco-friendly substance that's based on soy. Now, guess who has a taste for this? Foxes. And in these towns in Britain, people are going home and then they're parking their car in their driveway, and the foxes go, oh, gee, this looks like a tasty little treat. They come and they nibble, and then all the brake fluid leaks out and your brakes don't work. And so now people in Britain are having to put these basically giant car nappies on their cars to keep the foxes from getting in and eating their brakes.
Nappies? What are you talking
about? It's a big tarpaulin you drive in and you basically wrap it up like a dumpling.
That's too funny.
To keep the foxes out.
Well, good luck, because those foxes, anyone who's had chickens in the backyard knows they can get in anywhere. So that tarpaulin...
So all those movies with the car going what's happened? It's not the murderer. It's not the husband or the wife. It's the foxes. Yeah. We've also got problems with a glut of EVs around the world. So just as Chris Bowen is trying to get you to buy an EV, in fact, there's gluts of them all around the world. There's reports, this is pretty funny, in California. Have a look at, this is the e-charging stations. Again, something, as James said, something green that does not work. The e-charging stations rely on these cables to charge them in. But here's a bank of them. Look carefully at what's missing from all these e-charging stations, and we'll explain why when you get to the end.
One, cut all the Tesla charging cables. You would think that it's a protest or some symbol of activism, but it's not. It's the Bay Area. And these things have a load of copper in them. They're going to recycle them and cash them in.
So all those e-charging stations, none of them have the plugs because vandals and thieves have gone and stolen the copper, Rita.
Well, who could have predicted that? Because we know that it's happened with public transport, with train lines. Copper gets stolen.
It happens with catalytic converters in California too.
Completely predictable, but in the eagerness to thrust this crap on us, they don't worry about the consequence. And one of the big things you've got to worry about EVs is the value of the car once it's out of warranty, and that battery may need to be replaced at some point because those batteries can cost $40,000 depending on the model of the car.
Absolutely.
And we all know what happens, with your phone, with the battery, like you charge it and you uncharge it, and then it gets less and less charged.
Yeah.
So it's not like, imagine if you had a car where your fuel tank got smaller every time you filled it up.
Well, we're going to have a glut of EVs, that first lot that people bought, the early adopters, who are out of warranty, and they're going to be resold. What is the resale value? Do you want to take on an EV where the battery may have to be replaced and you've got to pay for it out of your pocket?
Well, even the BBC in Britain are now saying, whoops, it looks like the EV market is collapsing, just as Australia and Chris Bowen are rushing and forcing new ridiculous legislation which will force dealers to try and persuade you to buy an EV is the bottom line. That's what they're trying to do.
Rowan, the BBC are wrong, obviously, because I heard Chris Bowen say everyone wants EVs. The stats
well, this is the fascinating
are conclusive.
Thing, though.
Rowan, the BBC is wrong.
The docks of Europe are loaded with these cheap Chinese EVs that nobody
But this is a really interesting thing. Rowan, this is a really interesting thing about this. China is trying to pump out and conquer.
The way you said China there was
China.
Donald Trump.
It was a little Trumpier there, but the EVs, Rita, they're coming from China, and that's true. It's a fact, And these BYD things. This is really fascinating because in the U.S. right now, Joe Biden is pushing legislation and is going to basically put 100% tariff on these cheap Chinese EV imports, which shows to me that Trump has already won the economic debate on protecting America and American markets from these cheap Chinese products that are going to flood the economy, destroy all of their manufacturing, and leave everybody with these crummy cars.
And we're trailing along in the wake of this disaster. The damage that Chris Bowen and this insane climate ideology is doing to this country and will do for decades, or certainly for years to come, unless we change the government, is just unbelievable. But blame it on climate change, Rita. It's all the things you can blame on China. You've got 3 of them for us, haven't you? Climate change.
Here we go.
It's everything. I mean, anything that's happening that you don't like, from, from heart attacks to low TV ratings, they can connect to climate change. It's become the all-purpose solution or issue that you can blame any societal ill on. Anything that happens that you don't like,
blame it on climate change. Now let's go for a little bit of wackademia, the wacky world of academia. This is so good. Who'd have guessed what happens to millennials when they go on a hunger strike? Have a listen.
Over the past 12 days, we have committed ourselves to the peaceful yet extreme form of protest of hunger striking. This has led to rapid weight loss, mental and physical exhaustion, difficulty moving or standing, and chest pains. One striker was forced to seek off-campus hospital medical care for recovery.
Who'd have thought, James, that a hunger strike would lead to weight loss and difficulty getting up and moving? Who'd have guessed that one?
Can we just be clear? A lot of these campus hunger strikes, they're for 12 hours a day. It's basically intermittent fasting. It's basically what a lot of people do, but they do it for 16 or 18 hours a day if you're intermittent fasting. They're only doing 12. Yeah. I mean, presumably...
But let's face it, if you're a vegan, you're starting from a pretty low energy level anyway.
These are people whose normal diet is sort of, mung beans and stuff from the rabbit food aisle of the PetSmart. But so, they are starting off a really low base. It is, though, perfectly, an exemplar of the whole sort of performative nature of this thing. We're going to do something really tough until actually it gets tough. No. Then we're not going to do that.
Well, also the wonderful world of woke brings us some great lefty lunacy here. Now, who would like to take this story? The gay animal series.
It's an important issue.
Rita,
It's important.
It's a big issue.
No, it's an important issue. I think we need more documentaries on the LGBTQIA++ community in the animal kingdom, and I think we've got some. Have we got a grab? Yes.
Everything you were taught as a kid is wrong.
You make me wanna dance.
Gay penguins, bisexual lions, sex-changing clownfish.
This is a queer planet.
Queerness has always existed. It's only in humans that we have such a stigma about it.
The idea of just having two fixed sexes is clearly out of style.
Mother Nature is pretty open-minded. Sex is not just for reproduction.
It's clear that no matter where you look on our planet, nature is full of queer surprises.
To be honest, we should all probably get laid a little more than we do.
I don't know about you, but I want to hear more about these bisexual lions. What are they up to? But there you go. I'm going to try to milk a bull later. For me, because apparently this is just the thing. It's just the thing now.
Oh dear. Okay, we're going to take a short break after that. We can't top that. That's lefty lunacy.
So to speak.
Peak. Thank you, James. That's peak lefty lunacy. We'll be back in a tick. Richard Camp, lots more to talk about here on Outsiders. Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rita the Tweeter Maid Panahi, our Persian princess and very own Empress of X, James Prick Him with a Fork Morrow, and myself, at Rowan Dean. Yes, this week, after many, many years of total lonely abstinence and social media chastity, I decided it was time to get back in the saddle once more and re-embrace the sordid, grubby, fascinating, exhilarating world of Twitter. X. Yep, I started tweeting again. As an aside, I don't think Elon Musk thought through the name change from Twitter to X very well. As a brand name, Twitter is unique and came with its own inbuilt nouns and even a verb. You can tweet, you get a tweet, but can you X an X? Doesn't quite work. But I digress. I decided to get back into tweeting for two very simple and related issues. Firstly, since Elon Musk took over Twitter, he has been true to his word and fought valiantly against censorship and against the pernicious cancel culture that had turned the magical potential of social media into, for many people, a totalitarian hellhole. Indeed, the reason I stopped using social media, I cancelled my Facebook page, gave up on Instagram and abandoned Twitter several years ago, was because of the ever-present threat of being cancelled by some howling mob and demonised for some perceived politically incorrect misstep. You cannot have a free market of ideas and genuine freedom of expression if your thoughts and opinions are to be policed by the government, censored by big business, or cancelled by fear of a totalitarian woke lynch mob. It is impossible to overstate the importance of Elon Musk in defending our liberties. Whether we like it or not, digital technology is the new public square, and it is up to all lovers of democratic freedoms to ensure that public square remains a place in which ideas and opinions, and more importantly, criticism of the establishment, holding the powerful to account, and challenging authority not only exists, but thrives. Should social media be patrolled and policed to remove unacceptable pornography? Of course, and to protect kids and the vulnerable? Absolutely. We need to do that to guard against incitement of violence. Of course, all of that. As with any public square, that has always been the case, so that's not new. With free speech and freedom of expression, there have always been legitimate rules and boundaries. But in the so-called battle of ideas, for a society to evolve to be the best it can be, it is just as important, maybe even more important, to publicly hear the bad ideas as well as the good ones. Because it is only through exposure to to the bad ideas that we are forced to confront and evaluate them, and all ideas. A classic example this week was on Twitter when a former United Nations contributing author and retired UCL professor Bill Maguire put out this tweet in which he said, quote, "If I am brutally honest, the only realistic way I see emissions falling as fast as they need to avoid catastrophic climate breakdown is the culling of the human population by a pandemic with a very high fatality rate." Now, should that have been banned? No, of course not. I want to know exactly what these mad Malthusian Marxists are thinking and saying. But the tweet was subsequently withdrawn by Maguire himself. "Not because I regret it," he said, "but because people took it the wrong way." No, I don't think so. It was an appalling idea and was rightly exposed as such. No censorship required. Better still, it exposed Maguire's history of crazy climate cult extremism, such as his belief that human-caused global warming could lead to more earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. I'd like to ask Ian Plimer about that one. In my opinion, the man is a full-blown nutjob, this character, Maguire, convinced the planet is doomed because of global boiling. He obviously wasn't in Sydney yesterday, by the way, but he's not that much nuttier, I would argue, than every single individual in the Labor Party, all of the Greens and all of the Teals. But the other more important reason that finally galvanised me into wanting to re-engage with social media on a regular basis is because of the recent appalling censorship of social media by the federal Labor government and their so-called e-safety commissioner. Originally appointed by Malcolm Turnbull, enough said, Julie Inman Grant, our e-safety commissioner, was supposedly appointed to stop the things I just spoke about earlier: pornography, unacceptable material for kids, incitement to violence, and so on. Now, in that pursuit, I wish her well and will gladly support appropriate measures if she has any. But instead, what is now terrifyingly clear is that Ms. Grant, who, by the way, formerly worked for Twitter and appears to have some kind of grudge against Elon Musk, and her office appear to believe it is their job to censor political material and political opinions. And indeed, her most prominent actions have been to attempt to ban, firstly, a midwife who said, correctly, in my opinion, that men cannot lactate. Ooh, ban it.
Yeah.
She then banned the Canadian activist Billboard Chris, who we had on the show the other day, when he objected, again correctly in my opinion, to the appointment of a certain transgender individual to the World Health Organization. And then most famously, she attempted a worldwide ban on anyone seeing the footage of the attack on Bishop Marmari Emmanuel in his own church. The bishop himself said everyone should see it. Again, quite rightly in my opinion, a federal court judge last week overturned that ban. All three of those bans were, in my view, completely unacceptable and should disqualify Ms. Inman Grant from holding such an important position. But it got worse this week when Labor, with the help of the Teals, yes, all you Teal voting so-called free speech advocates, the Teals and the Greens with Labor passed this disgraceful and appalling digital ID bill. The coalition were lukewarm in their opposition to it. They voted against it, but they should have been out there shouting it down from the rafters. And they should be out there committing to repeal it the moment they win government. Let's hear it. Our children and our grandchildren will never forgive us for allowing such draconian powers to be given to governments and to bureaucrats. As someone pithily pointed out on Twitter, quote, "If the government sends me an identification card, I shall return it with a letter to explain that I do not need it. I already know who I am. That was a Tasmanian Douglas Graham protesting about the Australia card all the way back in the Bob Hawke days in 1987. Nothing has changed. We do not need the government to control our identity. So from now on, I will be imparting what meagre pearls of wisdom I have every day on Twitter, on X, so you can follow me on @RowanDean if you feel so inspired. But let me also share with you just a few of the highlights of what I've seen on X this week, and they all fall into the same basket, the wisdom of women on the topics of the day. Let's hear it from a grandmother about her concern about shared bathrooms at schools.
If you use this bathroom and you follow one of my beautiful granddaughters into this bathroom, you will need this bathroom. Grandmothers don't put up with that. And wait till you meet Grandpa.
Can't argue with that, but will the E-Safety Commissioner deem it unacceptable and ban it? She has form in that department. Or how about this very simple and elegant protest about the economic achievements of Joe Biden and indeed Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers? But if you really want to know why social media is so important, here is the best financial and political commentary I saw all week.
Girls, what's just happened?
So, there's an ice cream van there selling just 2 ice creams with 2 chewing gums in it.
Yeah.
For bloody £9 for 2 of them.
£9 for 2?
Yeah, £9. That is going to get nowhere. The one that comes on my street is either £1 a p or £2. That is going to get nowhere with that.
No, he ain't, is it?
No, he ain't.
That's well bad, isn't
Yeah,
it?
you should know. And he only does bloody card. Stood there with my cash. Bloody hell.
That's well bad, isn't it?
Bloody well bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, bet he can hear me.
Britain, there's your future Maggie Thatcher. God knows you need her. The future democratic well-being of the West lies in the innate rebelliousness and common sense, hopefully, of youth. £9 for 2 ice creams. I share her outrage. Let's hope the E-Safety Commissioner doesn't try and ban her. In the meantime, come and join me every day on Twitter if you feel so inclined, @RowanDean. When the flame of freedom is flickering so low around so many parts of the world, we must use the freedoms we have or lose them. Well, Israeli forces ramp up operations in northern Gaza and the eastern outskirts of Rafah in hopes to target Hamas's terrorist infrastructure. Right here on the desk with us is former British Commander Colonel Richard Kemp. Richard, so great to have you here in Australia with us on the desk. You're often up there on that wall there, and we always enjoy seeing you. We loved the display of guns last time in your home, which was just stunning. That was the colonial backdrop was fantastic. James wants it for his...
for my own library.
For his own library.
I'll have it shipped over.
Colonel, great to see you here in Australia. So just wanted to ask, everybody wants to know, what's the end game? Can Israel defeat Hamas? And what on earth are the Americans playing at?
Before I answer that, I'd like to say it's really great to be here in Australia. I always enjoy coming here, such a wonderful country. And secondly, you mentioned the common sense of youth. I've had the pleasure of visiting many schools here in Australia since I've been here, including Kessatora here in Sydney. And I've encountered a great deal of common sense of youth, and it gives me a good deal of optimism for the future when these, particularly the Jewish children I've met, are so confident, so articulate and so knowledgeable. As far as whether Israel can defeat Hamas in Gaza, I think that's what's going to happen. We've seen the IDF fighting extremely effectively. I've been inside Gaza several times while the war's going on with the IDF, and I've seen their actions on the ground. Extremely effective, Hamas, when they come up against real soldiers as opposed to civilians in their homes, they do one of three things. They either run away, they die, or they surrender. And when they surrender, they spill the beans. So I'm optimistic and confident about Israel's success in Gaza once it really embarks on the full campaign in Rafah. As for what the US is doing, I think the US is doing two things. First of all, in trying to pressure Israel to stop fighting, an obsession with not going into Rafah and dealing with that, and therefore not finishing off Hamas. I think, firstly, they're playing to the domestic electorate, which the majority support Israel, 80%, I think, according to recent polls, but there are many who don't. And Biden wants their votes as well and is prepared to put that above the survival of Israel. And secondly, they're desperate, Biden particularly desperate to appease Iran. He doesn't want Israel to finish off Iran's major proxy in that area. And it's all part of his long-term plan to empower and give Iran more authority in the region. And it's shameful, it's disgraceful.
James.
Well, we've had some breaking news in the last couple of hours that Benny Gantz, the opposition politician, former defense minister in the war cabinet, has issued a deadline of June 8th to the Netanyahu government to say, you've got to find a way to wrap this war up. This is a huge problem for Netanyahu, but also is Benny Gantz being used by the Biden administration as a way to try and get somebody more amenable to their pro-Iran position into power in Israel if Netanyahu is so insistent on defeating Iran rather than allowing its proxies to run rampant, which seems to be what this White House is keen to do?
Yeah, I mean, the Biden White House, ever since it came into office, or more accurately, ever since the new Netanyahu government came into office during Biden's tenure, has been trying to bring that government down, literally. And that's bad enough in normal times, but for a very close ally to try and bring down the government of its ally, democratically elected government, during a war is absolutely disgraceful. And that's what Biden's been trying to do. And we've heard remarks from him, from Chuck Schumer, one of his close allies, and also from the Secretary of State to that effect. I don't think there's any precedent for an ally trying to bring down a democratically elected government during a war.
Well, we've seen the US be behind regime change in a number of countries, but yet you wouldn't expect it to be an ally.
Right.
But on Rafah, it's taken 7 months for Israel to go there. Did they take too long? Why didn't they do this earlier, especially given the plight of the hostages and where they could be held?
I don't like to second guess a responsible democratic government and armed forces like Israel because we don't know all of the facts involved. But I think in general terms, when you fight a war, one of the most important things is speed and shock action to dislodge and to undermine the enemy and to destroy the enemy. And that's very important. But that has to be balanced also with not throwing away Israeli soldiers' lives. So you have to operate with a degree of caution. And secondly, in this particular case, we're talking about a very dense civilian population which Israel has to protect, and speed can sometimes work against that. The IDF does everything they can to minimise civilian casualties, despite the lies you hear on other elements of the international media.
Well, the UN downgraded the casualty count quite dramatically in recent days. Do we have a clear picture of what the civilian casualties are in that conflict?
The only information we have comes, and the only information the UN has and everybody else, including the White House, comes from Hamas. And we don't know whether their figures are accurate, whether they're underplaying it, overplaying it. The likelihood is they're inflating the figures as they have done in the past. But what we do know, I think, if we assume for a moment their figures are roughly accurate, is that the ratio of civilian casualties to military casualties is significantly lower in this war than I think any other comparable conflict that I know of. They're less than one civilian to every combatant killed, which is bad. But when you're fighting an enemy that is among the civilian population and trying to get you, as Hamas are, to kill the civilians, it's a very impressive figure, terrible though it is. And it compares to less than 1-to-1, compares to 5-to-1 and 3-to-1 in respect to US casualty ratios in Afghanistan and Iraq. So it's a great achievement by the IDF, in my opinion.
So, Richard, you've spent quite a bit of time in Israel recently. So how is the population... what's been the psychology of the aftermath of October 7th, and is the population behind the war? I mean, James just referred to the politics of it, but what did you get from the sense of the Israeli people themselves?
Yeah, on my previous visits to Israel over the last few years, there's been deep division in Israel, as there is in most countries in the world, including, of course, Australia. Yeah. But when I arrived on the 9th of October, and I've been there pretty much ever since the 9th, I saw a completely unified country, full square behind defeating Hamas after the horrors of the 7th of October. The only divisions really that exist in Israeli society that I've detected today are, first of all, between those who think everything should be done to get the hostages out and those who think everything should be done to destroy Hamas. The two things, to an extent, are in conflict, but not entirely. I think the Israeli government has achieved pretty much the right balance in those two objectives, as far as I can see. The other division is between those who hate Prime Minister Netanyahu and those who support him. And this campaign against him has been going on for a long, long time. And I would have hoped that in this war, the anti-Netanyahu faction could have unified behind him for this conflict and then maybe take it up again afterwards. But generally speaking, I think the majority of the population are right behind the government and the war that's going on now.
And we've frequently spoken about the threat of Iran, nuclear weapons and so on. That threat has just obviously increased. What's your fears or take on where Iran is sitting now? What are the mullahs thinking?
Well, Iran, of course, is 100% behind everything that's going on now in Gaza and Israel. Hamas is an Iranian proxy, as is Islamic Jihad, the junior terrorist partner in Gaza. Hezbollah in the north, which has been attacking Israel daily since the 7th of October, is another Iranian proxy, as are various proxies all around Israel. They call it the Ring of Fire. So Iran has got its fingers on all of it. And of course, Russia and Iran and China and Iran are closely linked. And no doubt there's Russian and Chinese hands behind this as well. But the biggest fear, I think Israel can defeat without problem all of these networks. I say without problem. There will be problems, but they can do it. The nuclear issue, which you mentioned, is the really big one. And Iran is on the cusp of developing nuclear missiles. That's not going to be stopped under President Biden. Maybe a subsequent president will do something more effective. But meanwhile, Israel's got to maintain its military and covert campaign against the Iranian nuclear program.
And finally, on that campaign and that program, what are the chances that if Netanyahu sees himself under existential threat here and under pressure from the United States, he decides to escalate this conflict further and strike directly at Iranian nuclear targets, which I know are very hardened and so on, but they've done this sort of thing before?
Yeah, I know Netanyahu quite well, and I don't think he is the kind of person who is going to lash out for his own survival. He will if he feels that Israel's survival is at stake. He will escalate against Iran if that is necessary. But meanwhile, I think he's taking a much more measured approach and working hard now to deal with Hamas, subsequently with Hezbollah decisively, I think. And then, of course, the tension will turn on Iran.
Richard, I just quickly want to ask you, before you go, about London and what happens in the UK if Keir Starmer, which looks like happening, gets in.
Yeah. Well, the Labour Party remains Corbyn's party. It's got a different leader, it's got different kind of wallpaper around it, but it's the same party. And let's not forget, Keir Starmer was foursquare behind Corbyn when he was the leader of the party. The Labour Party have been actually remarkably strong on Israel since this war began. They've basically followed the British government line, which has been quite good. But it's for electoral purposes. Once they get into office, their tone will change. And I believe that under a Labour government, Britain will become probably Israel's worst enemy in Europe.
My God, that's terrifying. Colonel Richard Kemp, always great to chat to you. I'm sorry it's always about such serious topics, but that's the world we live in. Enjoy the rest of your time in Australia. Great to have you here. After the break, we've got James's donkey vote. Lots more to talk about here on Outsiders.
Hello, you're watching Outsiders. I'm James Morrow, here as always with Rowan Dean and Rita Panahi. And You know, one of the great evils of so-called progressive politics, whether it is the Labor Party in Australia or the Democrats in America, is that they treat everyone, particularly members of minority groups, not as individuals, but as members of a tribe, and say that you have to vote for us because we will protect your group interests, rather than trying to compete for every individual's vote as an individual. And it looks like that may finally be starting to crumble, though, in the United States, where black voters, like voters of all sorts of other descriptors, appear to be abandoning Joe Biden as the complete shambling train wreck of a presidency that he is. Don't take my word for it. Here's CNN.
Look at this number for Donald Trump, 22%. Where was Donald Trump at this point 4 years ago in the polls? He was just at 9% of the vote. So he's seen more than a doubling in his support among African Americans. This margin, which was in the 70s just 4 years ago, look at where it is now, 69 minus 22. That puts it in the 40s. My goodness gracious, if this held through the general election, obviously we're still months away, this would be by far the best performance for a Republican candidate among black voters in a generation, 2 generations, probably since 1960.
Well, this has got Biden's handlers in an absolute panic now, as you'd imagine, and they've rushed the president out on what else? A great big pandering tour to try and stem the bleeding. This has included stops at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, a speech to an NAACP dinner in Detroit, and graduation addresses at Morehouse College, which is known colloquially as a historically black college or university, a.k.a. an HBCU. How did the president go there, by the way, getting through that little acronym?
This investment has helped HBCUs do everything from build student housing, to study climate science, to create health research labs, prepare black students for labs and industries of the future.
Yes, the good old HBGs uses, or whatever he was trying to say there. That was Biden, by the way, speaking to the NAACP, which, guess what? He's always been supportive of.
My name's Joe Biden, and I'm a lifetime member of the NAACP.
Well, yeah, sure, okay. And, obviously the whole speech was filled with a few minutes of typical word salad.
That's why my administration is taking the most significant action, notwithstanding the Supreme Court tried to stop me, to provide student debt relief, most supreme ever.
Most supreme ever, followed by, of course, the obligatory, where am I going to get off the stage? Now, well done, by the way. Whoever was in charge of putting the tape markings on the floor, you did an absolutely stunning job there. It was very easy for him to follow. Now, there's a lot of reasons, though, why Joe Biden's support among black voters is cratering. Number one, of course, being the economy. But former Oklahoma Speaker of the House T.W. Shannon recently took it further, having this to say.
I think the Democrats recognize they are losing their grip on the black vote. Listen, there are 2 reasons why black voters are running toward Donald Trump. Number one, they remember COVID. They remember it was the Democrats who were saying you can't go to work, you can't go to your job, and you can't send your kids to schools. And Republicans were saying, we want to protect your job and we want your kids to go to school. And they also know that Joe Biden has replaced African Americans for illegals. The open border crisis is not by hop and circumstance. It is a direct attack on black voters, and black people recognize it. They're asking the question, why is it that Jamal is locked up, but Julio's running around doing whatever he wants to in this country with benefits from the government?
So there we have it. We've got the economy, we've got COVID and illegal immigration's disproportionate impacts, to coin a phrase, on African American communities. But then, of course, there's another issue with this, and that is Joe Biden himself. He may have claimed to have been brought up in the past in the black church when he wasn't, of course, attending the Jewish shul, the Shiite mosque, and the Baha'i temple. But let's just remember that Joe Biden's history when it comes to black Americans is well, shall we say, a little checkered and has involved calling young black men predators and pushing a 1994 crime bill that led to the mass incarceration of black Americans.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. I mean, you got the first sort of mainstream African American who was articulate and bright and clean and nice-looking guy.
Biden recalling his early Senate career, bringing up two segregationist senators, Herman Talmadge and James Eastland, who called African Americans an inferior race. I was in a caucus with James O. Eastland, Biden said. He never called me boy. He always called me son. At least there was some civility. We got things done.
The senators that he is speaking of with such adoration are individuals who made and built their reputation on segregation. The Ku Klux Klan celebrated the election of one of them.
Using the word boy in the way he did can cause hurt and pain, and we need a presidential nominee and the leader of our party to be sensitive to that.
My Democratic colleagues don't like me saying this. I think the two-party system is good for the South and good for the Negro, good for the black. Other than the fact that they still call me boy, I think they've changed their mind a little bit.
And amazingly, there are 6 more minutes of that compilation of Joe Biden saying things that are frankly pretty racist, which should give you an idea of where all this is going. But never mind. Let's be fair. Let's give the president, Joe Biden, the last word here as we recall his famous pitch to African-American voters in 2020.
I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
Well, indeed.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. Well, we're joined now by Wrong Speak Publishing founder Adam Coleman. Great to have you here on Outsiders, Adam. Got the book behind you, Black Victim, Black Victor, and let's talk about Joe Biden, where he sits in that Black Victim or Black Victor pantheon. Obviously the news has been pretty consistent this week that black men in particular are supporting Donald Trump, but is Biden seriously losing the black vote?
Yes. I think he's losing the black vote for the same reasons as that gentleman in that clip was stating. It's mostly economic reasons. We have less buying power, and whoever's in power, we're going to blame. So Joe Biden's in power. He's held responsible for our economic distress. So I think that is the number one reason. I do think immigration is becoming a major issue for all Americans, especially Black Americans, because over 60% of Black Americans live within these urban city areas. And that's where all these people are going, especially in Democrat cities in the North, like Chicago and New York City. And so you're starting to see resources taken away from the people within these cities and basically brought over to support these particular people who aren't even supposed to be here. And it's even worse because Joe Biden has not controlled the border, and he's held responsible for it. And then on top of that, Joe Biden doesn't want to provide any sort of resources for the cities to support the distress of the cities. So I think all types of people, including Black Americans within these cities, are blaming Joe Biden for this.
Rita.
But yes, Trump is almost doubling what the Democrats, what the Republican nominee typically would get from that black demographic, but it's still 80%. What are the main reasons that the African-American vote is so strongly behind the Democrats, even if it's fracturing a little bit at the moment?
I think the biggest issue is that it is cultural. Like I said before, most Black Americans, over 60% of Black Americans live within or in the surrounding Democrat-controlled cities. So in these cities, they're not being, there's not much competition for their vote coming from the Republican Party. And I say this from experience, many Black Americans don't even know Republicans. Their idea of what a Republican is basically what they see on television. And that's not the best way to gauge what a political party supports. By listening to a left-wing media apparatus that gives you some sort of filtering of what the Republicans want. So honestly, I think local elections are extremely important. The problem is that And I understand it from a fiscal standpoint, but the problem is that Republicans, for decades, like you said, generations, have not shown up in many of these cities. Chicago, for example, hasn't had a Republican mayor since the early 1900s. New Orleans hasn't had a Republican mayor since the 1800s.
Two of the most crime-riddled cities in America. In fact, I think they're 1 and 2.
But Adam, I want to ask you though, like let's move beyond though the general sort of broad, political ballot box sort of part to the way the racial tensions are still being exploited in other areas. And there was a fascinating case this week where a Facebook executive was sentenced to 5 years in prison for, this scam. And they were a DEI, diversity executive, and they had a scam. They were ripping people off. They ripped the companies off, $5 million, going to jail. But they used the sort of the shield of DEI and racism to avoid criticism and prosecution. And I mean, that just sums up to me the way that these sorts of efforts, which are really about dividing people, are then used as cover for all sorts of other things. What do you think, Adam?
No, you're exactly right. In my piece for the New York Post, I highlight how basically DEI is a sham. It's run by a sham ideology. You can't prove if DEI is working. How do you show the cost-benefit analysis of DEI? You can't. But at the end of the day, DEI wants more money. They want more money to support the industry in itself. They want more trainings. They want more meetings, more paperwork to show what at the end? Nothing. But everybody gets paid, right? All the consultants get paid. And someone like this woman, Smiles, who got prosecuted, and thankfully there was some sort of justice that was brought to us. She's basically facing 5 years for being a con artist. And the reason she was able to get away with it is because you don't question DEI within corporate America. Why is the budget of DEI offices 2 times the budget of offices that actually make money within corporations? You're not supposed to ask these questions. And so I think that's the general weakness that you're seeing within corporate America.
Adam, I wanted to ask you about Donald Trump, the various trials that he's going on. He made comments earlier in the week, which has sent many on the sort of usual suspects at CNN and elsewhere absolutely berserk, where he said that many black Americans identified, I'm paraphrasing Donald Trump, obviously, but he was saying many black Americans identified with him because they'd been persecuted in the same way that he was being persecuted by a flawed justice system. The left have gone crazy, called him a racist, etc., etc. But do you think there's any legitimacy in that argument of his?
I think there might be some who carry this viewpoint that the justice system is overwhelmingly against Black Americans when facing justice, and maybe there's some sort of persecution against them. Whether that's the case or not, that can be debated. But I'll say this, I use the measuring stick of what does my mother think? Because my mother's not political. She doesn't pay attention to everything that's going on. And unprovoked, my mother asked me, why are they going after Donald Trump? This doesn't make any sense. And so to me, Black woman who's sitting here, I don't even think she voted for him. And she even says, this doesn't seem right. Why are they going after him? I think that says a lot. I think a lot of people are saying, when you're going after Donald Trump for hush money, where he's likely not going to get any sort of jail time or any severe punishment, right? They're just trying to drag him through the mud and make him spend a whole bunch of money on lawyer fees. I mean, to me, this seems politically motivated. Anybody who's not partisan can see that it's politically motivated, whether you like him or not. And I'm hearing story after story from random people who are saying the same thing as my mother, that this seems highly politically motivated. It seems very obvious as to what's going on, and they don't like it.
Adam, I think we should always listen to our mothers, and I love the idea of the Mrs. Coleman metric. I think we should get Mrs. Coleman on at some point to talk about this very thing. But absolutely, we want to hear from her point of view because she's spot on there. Adam Coleman, thanks so much, and say g'day to Australia to your mum. Okay, mate.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. After the break, Canberra Clown Show. Lots to talk about. roll up, step right this way. It's the craziest show on earth. It's the Canberra Clown Show, which this week saw unrivaled big spending under the Burley Griffin big top, in what the Spectator Australia labelled Gymflation, the art of pumping more and more government spending, useless subsidies and welfare entitlements into the out-of-control economy until the entire Australian economic bubble bursts. Helping pop the balloon was, of course, our other favourite financial clown, Katie Gallagher, explaining how crazy left-wing gender ideology shaped the budget.
This is a budget that has the Australian people right at the centre. This is the first one that aligns it to our gender equality strategy, so you'll see that in that document, and you should see this as continued progress on the list of things each budget we've been trying to gently and sometimes not so gently shift the dial on support for women and promoting a gender equal Australia, because we know that's good for everyone, not just women.
Silly me, and I always thought the point of a budget was to make the economy work better for business, not just for women. Although it's worth pointing out these three women here have always done very well out of Labor's policies supporting women. Here is a rather scary juxtaposition I have shown before. Katie Gallagher, no less.
The digital ID system being safe and trustworthy and voluntary. Government's position on COVID-19 vaccinations is that it is voluntary.
Yes, thank you, Katie. Meanwhile, Chris Bobo Bowen was chortling away this week, pleased as punch with himself for having gotten his preposterous new vehicles emissions standards legislation through Parliament, under which car makers who exceed their carbon emissions limits face a financial penalty. Whoa! And if that's not bad enough, a $60 million fund of your money will be established for electric vehicle charges in car dealerships. Tradies beware. This will hit you hard, make no mistake about that. And Tassie tradies, you can thank this clown, the one on the left, Senator Tammy Tyrrell, up until now most famous for declaring that she is not the clown on the right. "I'm not Jackie," is her most famous comment to date. Well, this is the person whom all Tassie tradies and mainland tradies, farmers, and those who rely on cars and trucks rather than EV toys can now thank for the soaring cost of their vehicles, because it is she, Tammy Tyrrell, who idiotically allowed this climate cult bill, these emission standards, to go through Parliament. Bobo Bowen also got excited on Twitter about opposition leader Peter Dutton, declaring in a tweet that, quote, "Peter Dutton mentioned me personally 4 times in his budget reply." Yes, Chris, there's a reason for that, and allow me to let you in on a little secret. You see, Chris, you are the coalition's secret weapon, because it is you who will win the coalition the next election, just like you won it for them in 2019. But Chris went on, and here's the best bit. Quote from Chris Bowen, "It's nice that Peter Dutton mentioned me personally 4 times in his budget reply, but it would have been better if he had mentioned climate change at least once. Because in his 24 years in Parliament, he has mentioned climate change just 4 times. Well, Bobo, you've convinced me. There's a reason to vote for Peter Dutton if ever there was one." Speaking of clowns, Burko was perfecting his favourite routine this week. It's called Making Up What Angus Taylor Really Said. Here we go. Have a listen to what Tony Burke says in Parliament about what Angus Taylor said here on Sky.
Because the Shadow Treasurer was asked by Laura Jays about his attitude to why they were opposed to multiple employer bargaining. And he answered this: it pushes up wages. It pushes up wages. He went on with more, saying this is a bad place to go.
Now, let's see what Angus really said to Laura Jays. And guess what? Turns out it's pretty much the complete opposite.
How would multi-employer bargaining actually push up prices and the cost of living?
Well, it pushes up wages and pushes up prices. I mean, this is the point that the Reserve Bank has been making, that if you get in a race between wages and prices, two things happen. Prices go up and real wages ultimately lose.
Now, that's what I call a real lowdown and sneaky circus act and misleading Parliament, in my opinion. How do you know Tony Burke is telling porkies his lips are moving? We also learnt this week that sometimes a slip of the tongue reveals what's really going on. This week, the Digital ID Bill passed through Parliament, a national disgrace. And the Libs shamefully barely lifted a finger to stop it. Sure, they voted against it, but where was the arguments against it? Labor, of course, are claiming that digital ID is all voluntary. I played that clip earlier, just like they said about the vaccines.
It's not only voluntary, but it's a secure way and a reduced way of providing a lot of documentation to a range of different businesses or governments.
OK, and you're guaranteeing that it's not going to be compulsory. You've used the word voluntary a few times there.
Yeah, because I know there's a lot of myths out there about the digital ID, that it's, that it's somehow government tracking you or holding all this information about you, and it's none of those things, and that the information you provide can't be used for any other purpose.
And as I played before, yes, just like the vaccines, all voluntary. All right, totally voluntary, Katie. But then why did your colleague Stephen Jones make this unfortunate slip of the tongue this week? Whoops, there's the M word, mandate.
So it creates the choice and creates the mechanism through which a voluntary use of a digital ID system can be maintained and mandated in this country.
Ooh, mandated. Speaking of clowns, Walkout Watt is the new nickname for this comedian. Yes, Murray Watt managed to unite Australia's farmers into passing a no-confidence vote in Labor. He also was the reason the unprecedented walkout by farmers at Murray Watt's post-budget agricultural speech this week, as you can see here on your screens. The reason for the walkout? Because of the government's disgraceful plans to shut down the live sheep by sea industry. Yes, as Senator Matt Canavan said, the single biggest allocation of new spending on agriculture in the budget was to shut down an entire industry. Indeed, between the two of them, Walkout Watt and Blackout Bowen, they're bringing this country's rural communities and farming industries to their knees. It's even worse than that. Labor went into the last election needing to win in WA, so Albo himself seemed to suggest that policy to kill off the live sheep export trade was no longer Labor policy.
Why has Labor committed to ending live sheep exports, and will you put a timeline as to when that end will take place?
No, we won't, and we haven't in our policy. Our policy's changed.
Oh, what a turnaround, Tony. There's Anthony Albanese just moments ago. Our policy has changed, is his quote.
Labor obfuscation, half-truths, lies, whatever. What would George Costanza say about all of that?
Jerry, just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it.
Well, we always like to have the good news stories here as well, of course, on Outsiders. And congratulations to Bannister Dairy, who on Friday night won a swag of awards. They're a WA, West Australian farm there. A fantastic product. Bannister Dairy swept the board, literally, with all the awards there.
Have you had some?
Absolutely.
Bannister
Tell
Downs.
us about it.
Oh, it is delicious because I love my dairy like nothing else. And I tell you, Bannister Downs, if you can get it, it is excellent. Excellent.
Fantastic. Well, there's your ad. There's Rita Panahi. Absolutely. And I've met the people from that farm and they work so hard. Great Australian success story. Meanwhile, we learn as, Albo is trying to make a future for Australians and driving industry away. Cadbury's want to leave. Mars want to leave. Kellanova want to leave because of the high cost of energy, James.
Well, yeah, and I mean, this is the whole thing. They say, oh, we want to bring back manufacturing in Australia. But it's nonsense because, of course, we've got high energy prices being made worse by this government, inflexible industrial relations laws made worse by this government. So, when you add to that the fact that we are quite far away from any major market, this is a trifecta of disaster for anybody who's trying to, do this thing where what they're trying to do is essentially copy the Joe Biden Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, is not an Inflation Reduction Act. Right. But that's the story. But I have an idea, though. What about instead of, here's something we could do. The U.S. government seems to look very keen to outsource its research into gain of functions of viruses. And we could, and this week we've had some really interesting news here that before Congress, Lawrence Tabak, who was the deputy director of the National Institutes of Health, admitted that the government had been funding gain-of-function research programs at a little lab in Wuhan, China. Now, Elon Musk has quite correctly, I think, called for Dr. Fauci to be arrested as a result of this, because we know from time and again through all the documents that have been released, there was efforts to cover up, to avoid Freedom of Information Act requests, to keep people from knowing what role Fauci, the NIH, these other weird bodies that were getting funded by various sort of different organizations had in funding the research into the coronavirus. To me, I've always said this suggests to me why America and a lot of other countries were not so keen to have a big investigation into exactly where COVID came from.
Well, this is after years of falsehoods. Years of falsehoods, lies, doctors being intimidated, scientists being intimidated, people being called conspiracy theorists,
misinformation,
people
silencing,
being cancelled from social media, all this nonsense about misinformation. Finally admitting that the US funded dangerous virus research at this COVID lab. And think about it. What are the chances that we would have a COVID pandemic break out in a city, Wuhan, that has a massive lab studying COVID viruses?
It was a wet market. That's misinformation.
All of us should feel silly for not immediately connecting the lab to this virus outbreak.
Some of us did, Rita. Very early on.
It took me a good 6 to 8 weeks. But 6 to 8 weeks was all it was. But even for those 6 or 8 weeks...
It's taken these clowns years. But the other funny story out of the UK, James, this will come as a big surprise, Rita and James, that all those signs, remember all those signs, social distancing, stand over here, come over here, can't walk there. None of them worked.
None of them worked.
They did nothing. It was useless.
But also, another NIH official, Francis Collins, admitted that there was zero evidence when they said, everyone's got to be 6 feet apart. Well, actually, no, there was no evidence at all behind all that. So all that markings on the pavement, nonsense.
So all those Karens screaming at you,
get away!
No.
That's it for Outsiders. Go and have your glass of Bannister Downs milk. It's fantastic. Rita tells you so. That's it. We'll see you next Sunday here on Outsiders.